Welcome to the deep dive, where we take your sources, articles, and research and really unpack them to get to the fascinating core of a story.
Uh-huh.
Today, we're plunging into a moment in American history that was, well, quite literally explosive.
That's right. We're talking Los Angeles, early 1900s. A city just booming. I mean, building like crazy, growing so fast.
Yeah.
But just beneath that shiny surface, there was this intense, really violent struggle playing out. Labor versus capital.
And that conflict really ignited in a devastating way on October 1st, 1910, the bombing of the Los Angeles Times building.
Exactly. And our sources, they take us right into the heart of this event, but they also pull us into the orbits of three pretty remarkable individuals whose lives just intersected dramatically because of it.
Okay, who are we talking about?
Well, there's William J. Burns, maybe the most famous detective of his time, right? He gets tasked with finding who did it.
Burns, okay.
Then there's D.W. Griffith, the pioneering film director. He was actually right there in L.A.,
Mm-hmm.
already making films about the social tensions of the era.
Wow, Griffith, too.
And Clarence Darrow, the celebrated defense attorney. He gets pulled into the huge legal storm that follows the bombing.
Burns, Griffith, Darrow, quite a cast of characters.
Definitely.
So, our mission in this deep dive, using the material you've shared, is to understand how this crime, the manhunt, the trial, and these three men, how they didn't just reflect the times, but actually helped reshape American thought, politics, celebrity, even culture, in ways we can still kind of see today.
Yeah, let's dive in and see what the sources really tell us.
Okay, so let's set the scene first. Los Angeles back then. The sources paint a picture of a city really divided, almost at war, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. And a lot of that division centered around Harrison Gray Otis and the Los Angeles Times.
Right. He got total control of the paper back in 1886. Made it a huge success commercially, sure, but it was also just this weapon. Fiercely conservative, totally anti-union.
And it wasn't just opinions in the paper. The conflict, it apparently started as a press room thing, a dispute there, but it escalated fast.
Spill into the streets.
Yeah, exactly. Pickets outside the Times, boycotts of stores that advertised in the paper, even physical attacks on merchants. It was getting nasty.
And there was this group, the Merchants and Manufacturers Association, the M&M.
Right, key players on the capital side.
Yeah.
And their creed, the sources note, was blunt. We will employ no union man. Period.
Wow. And they enforced that.
Oh, yeah. With money, basically. Boycotts, financial pressure on anyone who didn't toe the line. And Otis, he was right there with them, proudly anti-union.
So what was the union response? The AFL, the American Federation of Labor?
Well, they set up a pretty muscular Central Labor Council, led by a guy named Patrick McCarthy. Their big goal,
Yeah.
get L.A. wages up to San Francisco levels.
Which were much higher.
About 30% higher, yeah. Big difference. And the sources even mentioned this secret war fund the AFL had, specifically to fight the Times.
Or fun. So this was serious.
Deadly serious. It got incredibly personal. You had strikes breaking out all over laundries, breweries, bakers, butchers. I mean, just buying bread or beer became a political act. You were picking a side.
And the Times' language. Pretty harsh.
Vicious. The sources quote, editorials calling San Francisco labor bosses guerrillas and union guys henchmen. Just toxic stuff.
So to kind of beef up the LA labor movement, leaders came down from San Francisco.
That's right. Olaf A. Feitmo, known as the Viking, he came down to give the L.A. Labor Council some backbone, as the sources put it. Big guy, apparently. Over 6 feet, 300 pounds, but also known for being smart.
And his arrival brought in more militant unions.
Yeah, specifically the structural iron workers. That really ratcheted things up. You started seeing violent street battles, pickets fighting hired thugs from the M&M, fighting scabs. The tension in the city must have been just thick.
Like a powder keg.
Exactly. And into that mix, the sources describe this terror campaign starting in the summer of 1910.
It started small, though, right? With a fake bomb.
Yeah, planted at the Alexandria Hotel Annex construction site. Seems like it was just meant to scare people, raise the fear level across the city.
Which it probably did.
Oh, I'm sure. But tragically, it was just a warm-up act. The real horror came at midnight, October 1st, 1910. A series of massive explosions just tore through the Los Angeles Times building.
Just imagine about 100 people inside, right? Working late, editors, printers.
Yeah, editorial staff, composing room, press room workers. And the building just becomes this inferno. Trap them. There was a detective, Eddie King, working undercover nearby. He described the flames, the heat, like an impenetrable wall.
Horrifying.
The sounds. Screams from inside. People started jumping, third-floor windows, just jumping to escape the fire, falling to their deaths on the pavement.
Oh,
Hitting
shit.
the detective, the sources recount his grim job,
Huh?
carrying bodies out, stacking them away from the flames, just trying to keep them identifiable.
Were the exits blocked?
Yeah, jammed shut by the blast, by debris.
Right.
There was this group of engravers. They made it to the roof, but they were stuck. There was an alley between them and a rooming house next door.
Could they get across?
People in the rooming house tried. They found a ladder, but it was too short. So this one guy, incredibly brave, he lies flat on the roof, holds the ladder out across the gap, while other people held his legs down. Just this desperate attempt to make a bridge.
Did anyone make it?
The sources don't specify if people crossed that ladder, but they do tell one particularly awful story. A worker named Harvey Elder.
What happened to him?
He jumped from a high window. Firemen and police were holding a net below, but he missed it. Landed on the concrete, died hours later in the hospital.
Just brutal.
The final toll was awful. 21 people dead.
Yeah.
Editors, operators, printers. Even the publisher, Harry Chandler's secretary. 16 of them left widows and children. Another 17 injured. The building itself, a ruin.
But the Times didn't miss an issue, did they?
That's the striking thing. Publisher Harry Chandler, he gathers the survivors near the still smoldering building and reveals they had a backup plan all along. An auxiliary newsroom, a plant ready to go.
Already set up. Wow.
Within hours, they were producing the first edition on borrowed presses.
And the headline?
A single-page, special edition. Headline screamed, "Unionist bombs wreck the Times." Right from the start, the narrative was set. Blame assigned.
So the city's reeling, the Times is pointing the finger. Who do they bring in to investigate?
The call goes out for the biggest name in detecting, William J. Burns.
The famous Burns.
Yep. His whole philosophy, his maxim for solving crimes was, find the motive, and in due course, the criminal will be revealed. That was his starting point here.
And did the motive seem obvious at first? Labor versus capital?
That was the obvious angle, sure. And his urgency only grew when, just a few months later, January 1911, the Llewellyn Iron Works gets bombed too. Raised the fear that this wasn't isolated, maybe part of a bigger campaign.
But Burns dug deeper, didn't he? Found something more complicated.
He did. The sources talk about this complex kind of covert scheme involving LA politicians and big businessmen, including Otis and Chandler from the Times, all tied to the Owens Valley Aqueduct.
Ah, the water story. That's always huge in LA.
Exactly. Basically, they'd use government surveys to secretly buy up a ton of land and water rights out in the San Fernando Valley.
Okay.
The plan was to build the aqueduct using city taxpayer money, bring all that water to their land, and then make an absolute fortune from the development.
Okay, so how does that connect to the bombing?
Well, there was a big mayoral election coming up in 1911, and the socialist candidate, Job Harriman, was looking strong.
And Harriman opposed this aqueduct scheme.
Strongly opposed using public water for private profit like that. So if Harriman won, Otis and Chandler stood to lose millions. Millions. Suddenly they have a massive potential motive too, right? To stop Harriman, maybe discredit labor.
So it wasn't just a simple labor bomb theory. There were other possibilities.
Definitely. And people were floating them. Eugene Debs, the big socialist leader, he immediately claimed it was the Times itself, the union haters, who did it, called it capital's last big fight.
Did he have any evidence or arguments?
He pointed out that Otis and other key Times officials just happened to be absent from the building that night, which seemed suspicious to him.
And wasn't there something about an insurance policy?
Yeah, that came out too. Otis had a $100,000 insurance policy on the building. Burns actually considered that as a potential motive himself. It just added layers.
So Burns is juggling these theories. How did he actually investigate?
Meticulously. He even realized he was being tailed by some mysterious man in a brown suit. Wasn't sure if the guy worked for Otis or for the unions.
Wow. Pressure from all sides.
Yeah, and he analyzed the bomb fragments, the alarm clock mechanism, the battery, the wiring, compared them to other bombings, like one in Peoria, Illinois, at a train yard.
Why was that comparison important?
Well, if the bombs were made the same way, it might point to a national conspiracy, likely labor. If they were different, maybe it pointed back to something local, maybe even Otis, like Deb suggested.
Did he get any leads on the actual bombers, the guys who planted it?
He did. He traced the dynamite high-grade 80% stuff back to a plant near Oakland. The clerk there, Bruce McCall, remembered the buyer. Guy used the name Bryce.
Did McCall describe him?
Yeah, pretty clearly. Said he was suspicious. Described Bryce as about 32, 5'10", 190 pounds, sandy, wavy hair, blue or gray eyes. Dressed well, like a gentleman.
Okay, so that's Bryce. Were there others involved?
Two other men picked up the dynamite later. One called Leonard, dark hair, dark eyes, 5'10", thin derby hat, seemed educated, knew about explosives. The other, Morris, shorter, swarthy, jet black hair, had an accent, said he was Spanish.
So Burns had descriptions to work with.
Right. The investigation then traced a boat they rented, the Peerless, back to an address in San Francisco, which turned out to be a vacant lot.
A dead end.
Not quite. Burns figured they must have stayed somewhere nearby. Found a landlady who kept a close eye on her boarders. And her descriptions of some men, one using the name David Kaplan and his friends, seemed to match Leonard and Bryce.
So Kaplan might be Leonard or Bryce.
Or connected to them, yeah. Now, the sources mentioned something interesting about Burns' own biases here. He apparently had this deep hatred for anarchists.
Why?
Seems like it was based on sensational press coverage after things like the Haymarket Affair and President McKinley's assassination. He saw them as dangerous foreign agents, even though, the sources say, he hadn't actually read any anarchist writings. This view kind of colored his investigation.
Did it lead him anywhere specific?
Yeah, it led him to suspect these guys might be hiding out in the home colony up in Washington state, which was known as an anarchist community.
Did he go up there?
He tried to go undercover as a hunter, apparently failed miserably, had to rely on his operatives posing as surveyors. They sent back reports about possible hiding spots, local contacts.
Was he making progress?
It was tough. And during this time, a whole string of new bombings happened in other cities. Springfield, French Lick, Omaha, Columbus.
That must have shaken him.
Yeah, the sources say it frayed his confidence, made him wonder if he was even on the right trail, or if this thing was just too big, too widespread.
But then he found a connection, right? Something linking it back.
A huge connection. He discovered that Bryce, the guy who bought the dynamite near Oakland, had also bought dynamite earlier from Portland, Indiana.
Okay.
And Portland, Indiana was the exact same town where another guy, J.W. McGraw, had bought explosives for that Peoria train yard bombing Burns was looking at.
Ah, so not the same guy, but the same source location.
Exactly. Bryce and McGraw were different people, but linked through this source. For Burns, this screamed conspiracy, a bigger, coordinated effort across the country.
While he's figuring this out, he's also under attack, right?
Oh, yeah. Earl Rogers, this notorious L.A. defense attorney who was actually working for Otis and the M&M, he's publicly tearing into Burns, accusing him of ripping off the city, having no real leads, even manufacturing evidence.
That must have hurt.
Immense pressure. Burns apparently had to borrow $14,000 just to keep the investigation going.
Did he ever doubt himself? Think about quitting.
There was a moment. He rushed back up to home colony, had a hot tip. Thought he had Kaplan. Turned out to be the wrong guy. Just some peddler. Sources say he felt really low then, might have considered giving up.
But then?
Then came the breakthrough. A coded telegram. From his son, Raymond Burns, who was working for him in Indianapolis.
What did it say?
Raymond reported he'd spotted J.W. McGraw, the guy linked to the Peoria bombing and the Indiana dynamite. The chase was definitely back on.
Okay, so while Burns is chasing bombers, let's switch gears for a second. D.W. Griffith, the filmmaker, he's in L.A. this whole time.
Right there, staying at the Alexandria Hotel, actually the same place where that fake bomb had been planted earlier. It's amazing how these things connect.
And the film industry itself was just taking off then, wasn't it?
Exploding, yeah. The first big screen theater had opened in New York back in 1896. There were years of nasty patent fights involving Thomas Edison and others. But by 1908, that got sorted out. Companies could finally just focus on making movies and making money.
And people were watching them? The Nickelodeons.
Huge. For a nickel, you got almost an hour of entertainment, 3 short films, maybe sing-along. By 1910, something like 30 million Americans, 30% of the whole country, were going every week. 9,000 Nickelodeons nationwide.
Wow.
The sources quote Harry Warner later, of Warner Bros. Fame, saying he just saw the nickels rolling in, called it a get-rich-quick scheme. Because you leased the films, you didn't sell them. Low investment, potentially huge returns.
And Griffith already had a connection, however small, to Burns.
Yeah, it's a funny side note. Apparently Griffith made a quick one-reel film for Burns once about a kidnapped girl. The sources point out how often villains menacing women popped up in Griffith's early work.
So here you have Burns the detective, Griffith the filmmaker, and soon Darrow the lawyer, all converging in L.A. around this massive crime.
It really is incredible. The sources kind of frame it as these 3 flawed geniuses whose lives intersect, and together they somehow help transform American culture.
What was Griffith's vision for film at this point? Was he just documenting things?
No, he wanted more. He wanted movies to tell proper stories, beginning, middle, end. He saw the potential for newsreels, actualities, but that wasn't his interest. He famously refused to film the Vanderbilt Cup car race because, for him, it lacked dramatic structure.
Interesting. And his personal life was complicated then.
Very. Sources mention Mary Pickford left his company for a bit, then came back.
Mm.
He was barely disappointed in another actress, Blanche Sweet, felt she was becoming too womanly, losing the sort of childlike innocence he preferred.
Hmm.
Plus, numerous affairs. He separated from his wife Linda after she found a love letter. But through it all, he just kept working, filming Enoch Arden down on the beach near Santa Monica.
But he wasn't just making melodramas, right? He used film for commentary.
Absolutely. That's crucial. His 1909 film, A Corner in Wheat, made just before he came to L.A. It was short, like maybe 15 minutes long, 950 feet of film, but it packed a punch. About economic injustice, the struggle of ordinary people just to afford bread while speculators got rich.
How did he tell that story?
Really innovatively, using parallel editing, cutting back and forth between the rich guys in the wheat pit, the baker, and the poor family unable to buy bread. It created this powerful connection, showed the alienation, but also the link between them.
That sounds pretty advanced for 1909.
It was. The sources call it marching the engaging and manipulative power of movies into the rough chaos of American politics.
Yeah.
It showed film could be a weapon, a tool for social argument.
Was it popular? Did people get it?
Hugely popular. Apparently, it played for months at the Orpheum Theater in Indianapolis.
Indianapolis, where Brun's son just spotted McGraw.
And where, the sources note, John J. McNamara, the head of the structural ironworkers, saw that very film, A Corner in Wheat. You have to wonder what he thought, seeing that story of struggle while involved in his own union battles.
Yeah, definitely. Did Griffith realize how powerful film could be?
He seemed to have a moment of clarity. The sources mention him watching an audience react to another film, an Edison movie called The Strike at the Mines, which portrayed union men negatively. Seeing the audience's reaction, he apparently understood film was this new force, as revolutionary as electricity. It could shape how people saw the world.
Okay, so that's the backdrop of this new, powerful medium. Let's get back to the manhunt. Raymond Burns in Indianapolis has spotted McGraw.
Right. And Raymond, the sources suggest, was really driven here. He wanted to impress his famous father, maybe make up for past mistakes or failures.
And the meeting he was shadowing, McGraw wasn't alone, was he?
No. He was meeting with John J. McNamara himself. J.J. McNamara, the secretary-treasurer, the big boss of the Structural Ironworkers Union.
And where did they meet?
At the Indianapolis Orpheum, the same theater where McNamara had seen Griffith's A Corner in Wheat. The connections keep looping back.
Why meet at a theater, not the union office?
Well, sources offer a surprisingly mundane reason.
Women trouble?
Really? For the head of a major union involved in a bombing investigation. Apparently so. JJ was trying to avoid his stenographer, a woman named Mary Dye. She'd become infatuated with him, possessive, maybe even making up stories. And she'd found a newspaper clipping about the LA bombing in JJ's mail, which must have worried him.
Okay.
And on top of that, JJ was apparently having an affair with their landlady, writing her passionate letters. So yeah, meeting away from the office might have seemed safer for multiple reasons.
Meanwhile, Burns's other operatives were closing in elsewhere.
Yeah, out near Pioneer Lake. Dean and Kaiser, the guys pretending to be surveyors, they were tracking Orty McManigal, another suspect, and a guy known only as Sullivan.
How did they find them?
Turns out Sullivan liked to drink. His drunken behavior at a place called Steinmetz's boarding house basically led the detectives right to them.
And Burns himself used some interesting tactics, right? Not just straight detective work.
Oh, Burns was a master manipulator. The sources detail him using a fortune teller, Madame Q, to plant ideas in McManigal's head, and especially in his wife Emma's head.
A fortune teller? Seriously?
Yep. He even supposedly gave a local barkeep a deck containing 52 aces of spades, telling him to use it if the superstitious McManigal asked for his fortune told. Just psychological games to make him anxious.
What did the fortune teller tell Emma McManigal?
She told Emma that two men brothers, whose names begin with the letter M, were going to blame her husband, Orty, for everything. Planted that seed of betrayal.
The McNamara brothers.
Exactly. So the arrests happen. William Burns, Jim McNamara, JJ's brother, and Orty McManigal are basically grabbed in Chicago. J.J. McNamara is arrested separately back in Indianapolis.
And this was controversial, the way they were arrested.
Hugely. They were essentially taken across state lines without proper extradition papers. Clarence Darrow immediately jumped on this, calling it kidnapping.
Darrow got involved right away.
Yeah, he took the extradition issue all the way to the Supreme Court, argued it was illegal, He lost that particular fight, but it showed his immediate, fierce opposition.
So Burns has the suspects. How does he get McManigal to talk?
He targeted McManigal as the likely weakest link. Let him call his wife, Emma, right after she'd been spooked by the fortune teller.
Clever.
Then Burns laid out the conspiracy law for him, explaining that even if McManigal didn't plant the LA bomb himself, he was just as guilty under the law if he was part of the conspiracy. Then the carrot: offer leniency if he confessed and cooperated.
And it worked.
Completely. McManigal spilled everything. Described this nationwide bombing campaign, over 100 bombs planted between 1905 and 1910.
100 bombs.
Using huge amounts of nitroglycerin dynamite, causing over $1 million in damage back then. And, of course, the 21 deaths in L.A. Burns realized this wasn't just random violence. The sources say he saw it as an all-out war fought with dynamite.
That's staggering.
But then came a tense period. They were waiting for the official extradition papers for the McNamaras, and Burns was terrified J.J. might try to escape. An Associated Press story broke early, reporting the arrest of James Sullivan, likely an alias for Jim McNamara, and McManigal.
So J.J. knew they were caught.
Burns feared he did. So he hatched this incredibly elaborate plan to get J.J. McNamara from Indianapolis to L.A. immediately, without waiting for the legal papers.
How?
Created a whole false trail. Publicly bought train tickets for J.J. heading to Colorado, but secretly, they moved him using a complex series of different cars. It required perfect timing, secrecy, and a lot of luck.
Sounds like something out of a movie.
Totally. And all this is happening amidst a massive public outcry. Labor leaders like Eugene Debs and Samuel Gompers are screaming, "Frame up," accusing Burns of manufacturing evidence.
But Burns stood his ground.
Fiercely defended his investigation. And in the end, despite the controversy, his plan worked. All three men, J.J. McNamara, Jim McNamara, and Ordie McManigal, were safely behind bars in the Los Angeles County Jail.
The stage was set for the trial.
The crime of the century, as everyone was calling it. And who steps up to lead the defense? Clarence Darrow.
The biggest defense lawyer in the country, but I thought the sources said he was tired, wanted to retire.
He was. 54 years old, weary of big cases, wanted to pay off debts, maybe write a novel. He had apparently promised his wife, Ruby, he was done with these draining crusades.
So what changed his mind?
Pressure. Huge pressure from labor leaders, including Samuel Gompers, the head of the AFL. They begged him, basically, and guaranteed his legal fees.
And he felt he couldn't say no.
He felt, as the sources put it, like he'd be a traitor to the cause if he refused. But he still had to go back to Ruby and ask permission to break his promise. You can imagine that conversation.
Yeah. What was Darrow's approach when he first met the McNamaras in jail?
It's telling. He didn't ask them if they did. He just shook their hands, looked at them not as monsters, but as, in his words, mortal souls. His goal, right from the start, was clear. Stop the state from executing them.
And the political backdrop was crucial here, right? That mayoral election.
Absolutely enormous. Job Harriman, the socialist candidate, was widely expected to win the upcoming 1911 LA election.
And if he won?
The understanding was he'd probably just dismiss the charges against the McNamaras. Labor was pouring everything into getting Harriman elected. Gompers himself shouted at rallies, "Let your watchword be Harriman and labor." The trial and the election were completely intertwined.
So Darrow builds his defense team. Who did he bring in?
Interesting people. Journalist Mary Field, who the sources note was actually his former lover, and an investigator named Bert Franklin.
What was their strategy, besides hoping Harriman won?
Well, they tried to undermine McManigal's confession, obviously, cast doubt on it.
And McManigal's wife, Emma, did she cooperate with Burns?
She played it smart. Burns gave her $50 for travel to L.A. expecting her help. But when she got there, Harriman's people met her, and she basically told Burns' men to get lost, refused to cooperate. A nice countermove.
Were there other potential witnesses they were worried about?
Yes, this hotel clerk, Kurt Diekelman, he could potentially place Jim McNamara in L.A. around the time of the bombing. Both sides were after him.
Darrow's team and Burns' team.
Yeah. Darrow's investigators, using fake names like Higgins and Hammerstrom, were trying to find him. Burns' guys, too. Darrow's team apparently offered Diekelman $5,000 to us. Well, probably to disappear or change his story.
Things are getting murky.
Very. The sources even described this weird dance between Darrow and one of Burns' top operatives, Guy Bittinger.
What happened there?
Bittinger somehow sold Darrow some documents for $500 cash, claiming they proved J.J. McNamara orchestrated everything. And then Darrow, maybe playing games or genuinely paranoid, actually hired Bittinger to try and find a mole he suspected within the Union defense team.
Hiring the enemy spy to find a spy? That's complex.
Darrow's world. And personally, during all this intensity, the sources say he lived pretty simply. An inexpensive two-room apartment, Murphy bed.
Oh.
Found it liberating, apparently. Spent time there with Mary Field, talking, writing, though they weren't romantically involved anymore.
But then the defense strategy took a really dark turn, didn't it? Jury tampering.
Yeah, this is where it really goes off the rails. Bert Franklin, Darrow's investigator, seems to have taken it upon himself, maybe with Darrow's tacit approval, maybe not, to make sure at least a couple of jurors would vote for acquittal, no matter what. He approached a juror prospect, an elderly carpenter named Robert Bain, whom he knew, offered him $4,000 for an acquittal vote.
$4,000? That's a lot of money back then. Did Bain take it?
No. The sources indicate Bain, or possibly another juror prospect named Lockwood who was approached, went straight to the district attorney.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. They agreed to cooperate, set a trap for Franklin.
And Franklin walked into it.
He did.
Yeah.
He was arrested right at the spot where the bribe money was supposed to be handed over. Attempted bribery. It blew the defense case wide open.
How did Darrow react?
Devastated.
Yeah.
Utterly crushed. The sources say he was physically shaken, couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, even contemplated suicide.
That bad.
That bad. But his wife Ruby and Mary Field rallied around him, supported him. He decided he had to keep fighting somehow.
So, with the trial seemingly doomed, what happens next? Negotiations.
Exactly. And this is where another fascinating character enters. The journalist, Lincoln Steffens.
Steffens, the famous muckraker.
The same. He came to L.A. actually intending to write about the idea of justifiable dynamiting. This controversial notion was floating around that maybe labor had been pushed so hard by capital's tactics that violence was their only recourse.
That's a provocative idea.
Highly. Steffens actually went to the jail and met with the McNamara brothers. He proposed they confess to the dynamiting, but frame it publicly in that context. Tell the world why they did it, that the capitalist conspiracy forced their hand.
How did the brothers react to that?
We don't know their immediate reaction to Steffens, but it set the stage for Darrow's next move. He had to go convince them to plead guilty.
That must have been incredibly difficult.
Had to be. He basically told them the case was hopeless now after Franklin's arrest. But he laid out the potential upsides of a plea deal.
Which were?
Jim McNamara escapes the death penalty, gets life instead. They avoid implicating other union officials, or the anarchists Kaplan and Schmitty, who are still at large. And J.J., the brother, would likely get a much lighter sentence than if convicted at trial.
Did they agree right away?
Jim initially refused. The sources quote him yelling, "I won't do it." But Darrow kept pressing. Eventually, Jim conceded, just said, "All right, I'm licked."
So they made a deal.
Behind closed doors, yes. The final agreement. Jim McNamara pleads guilty, gets a life sentence. J.J. McNamara pleads guilty, gets 15 years. The judge actually upped it from the 10 they'd initially discussed.
Did Jim confess publicly? What did he say?
He provided a written confession, witnessed by Darrow and the DA. He admitted placing the suitcase bomb, 16 sticks of 80% dynamite in Ink Alley behind the Times building. But crucially, he insisted his intent was only to damage the building, to scare the owners. He claimed he never intended to kill anyone.
How did people react when the guilty pleas were announced?
Chaos. Absolute pandemonium in the courtroom. Labor supporters who had believed the McNamaras were innocent felt utterly shocked, betrayed.
What about Steffens?
Steffens rushed back to the jail. His view shifted, too. He realized his justifiable dynamiting idea had maybe helped pave the way for the pleas, making him, as he put it, the GOAT. But he still maintained his critique of the capitalist system that led to such conflict.
And Darrow?
Darrow just seemed stunned by the whole turn of events. Called it the damnedest thing that ever happened.
So the trial ends abruptly. What was the aftermath for the key players? Burns.
Burns felt totally vindicated, immensely proud. Got a congratulatory telegram from Teddy Roosevelt, no less.
But the attacks from labor didn't stop.
No way. Labor leaders felt betrayed by the guilty pleas and continued to hammer Burns, accusing him of framing them all along. He saw the convictions as proof he was right. They saw it as proof of his manipulation.
Did Burns keep investigating?
Yeah, he kept working, trying to bolster the case and go after other union officials he believed McManacle's confession implicated.
So the fight continued in the press.
Oh, yeah. Labor papers like Appeal to Reason, figures like Gompers. They kept attacking Burns, accusing him of frame-ups, manufacturing evidence. That narrative persisted for years.
And Darrow, he faced his own trials, didn't he, for the bribery attempt?
He did. He was tried twice for bribing jurors, acquitted both times. His defense in the first trial was apparently incredibly emotional, captivating. He narrowly escaped ruin.
You mentioned that chance meeting years later. Burns, Darrow, Griffith, Steffens.
Yeah, amazing image, isn't it? All four of them, years after the trial, bumping into each other at the Alexandria Hotel in L.A., the very hotel connected to the start of the bombing scares.
And Griffith asked Burns about a fight.
That's the detail the sources highlight. Griffith, the filmmaker, asked Burns about a physical fight he'd had with Earl Rogers, the lawyer attacking him, during the bribery trial. Griffith asked, "What did you hit him with, Mr. Burns?"
Why did he ask that?
The sources suggest it showed Griffith's very practical, almost technical interest in physical conflict, like how he'd manage actors fighting on set. Apparently, Griffith himself shadowboxed daily. He was interested in the mechanics of it.
Fascinating. What about Darrow's legacy after all this?
The sources argue the trial fundamentally changed him. He went from being this weary guy wanting out back to being a fully engaged crusader. He admitted his recklessness in the bribery mess, felt the shame, but surviving it renewed his purpose.
And Mary Field, his former lover and colleague.
There's this mention of a photo taken at a post-trial luncheon. Darrow looks relieved but worn. Mary Field is there, and the source describes her having this secret smile, maybe knowing just how close Darrow came to total collapse and how this whole ordeal had given him a second chance at his life's work.
And Griffith, how did he ultimately view the bombing? Did the guilty pleas change his mind?
Apparently not entirely. The sources say that Griffith, much like Steffens and another prominent figure, newspaper publisher E.W. Scripps, came to accept that idea of justifiable dynamiting.
Really? Even after the confession?
Seems so. They believed that labor, facing this entrenched capital conspiracy, really had no other choice but violence. Griffith even apparently started viewing the Times workers who died not just as victims, but as soldiers killed in that ongoing war. A really stark perspective.
Whatever happened to the other suspects? Kaplan and Schmitty.
Burns kept hunting them, but they vanished after the trial. Just disappeared. They weren't caught until years later, 1915. A bomb factory accidentally exploded in New York City, and the investigation linked them back to the dynamite used in the LA Times bombing.
So they were eventually caught.
Yep. Took a while, but the trail didn't go completely cold.
So wrapping up, the legacy of these three men, Burns, Darrow, Griffith, their lives colliding in this firestorm, it had lasting impact.
That's what the sources strongly suggest. Despite all their flaws, the controversies, their battles during this incredibly turbulent time in LA really did help shape modern America, impacting law, politics, media, celebrity, culture in ways that still echo.
As we bring this deep dive to a close, it really is fascinating, isn't it? How this one single, incredibly violent event in Los Angeles just ripped the lid off the conflicts simmering in early 20th century America.
Yeah, it became this absolute flashpoint, and the shockwaves spread out, influencing everything from legal strategies to how movies told stories to how political battles were fought, all through the actions and reactions of these very different, very complex individuals caught in the middle of it.
And you really can draw parallels to today, can't you? You think about how information gets shaped, how polarized it can be.
Definitely. Or how conflicts between big money interests and labor or other groups fighting for power still play out, and the role individuals play, trying to navigate that or maybe even influence it.
The source material we dug into today, it presented perspectives, Steffens, Griffith, scripts that are maybe uncomfortable for us now. This idea of justifiable dynamiting.
Right. And obviously we're not endorsing violence in any way here.
Yeah.
But understanding that viewpoint existed, even over a century ago. That some people genuinely believed the system was so oppressive, so rigged, that extreme measures were the only option left.
It makes you think, doesn't it, about how extreme conflict, when people feel there's no other way out, can push them towards extreme actions.
Absolutely. What lessons does that hold for us now in our own time, still dealing with deep divisions, still wrestling with questions of justice and power? It definitely leaves you with a lot to consider.